Greetings and thank you for joining us. Today's virtual workshop will be the full cycle performance workshop for goal setting and calibration for leaders. In today's workshop, we'll be covering a lot of information. Be sure to check out the links in the description box below for helpful resources that go along with this workshop. Today's agenda will include an introduction, the anticipated challenges of full cycle performance, a force field analysis, goal setting and its rollout, calibration, rater bias, and next steps. For this workshop, we have 4 primary objectives. First, to prepare for potential challenges as we implement the new performance program. Second, to help you develop strategic, smarter goals for yourselves and your teams. Third, to create a calibration plan if you need one. And fourth, to gain awareness of potential rater biases. July 2016 marked the launch of UNCW's Full Cycle Performance Program, and during that time we held a number of workshops for supervisors, after which we launched a survey to get feedback from those supervisors. And from that survey we were able to extract the top 5 anticipated challenges of implementing this new performance program. And I want to go over them now so that you know to be prepared for some of these obstacles as you move forward with this process. So by far, the top 2 biggest concerns as far as moving forward were buy-in, and by this we mean both buy-in from higher level supervisors, but also buy-in from your employees, as well as time. The other common anticipated challenges were setting individual goals, calibrating institutional goals, and finally actually having these conversations with your employees and with your team. Throughout today's workshop, we'll be sure to keep these anticipated challenges in mind and ultimately equip you with the tools, resources, and strategies you need to best implement the full cycle performance program.
So to help you along with this, we have what's called the force field analysis worksheet. Force field analysis is not something that we have developed, but something that can be found at mindtools.com. It can also be found at the Full Cycle Performance webpage that you can simply Google on our UNCW webpage, Full Cycle Performance, and you'll gain access to many of these resources. Thirdly, you can also look down in the details within this video and you can find some of these important tools that can help guide you in this process. So that said, let's dive right in. When you have a staff meeting, it's important for you to set the intent and say, why are you even doing this activity together, this force field analysis? What is the end goal that you want them to experience or have outcomes towards? And then work backwards. It's Stephen Covey's famous begin with the end in mind. You know, one of the successful habits of highly effective people. When you live and run meetings with that in mind, you're going to find that the success of that meeting is very easily accomplished. So that said, using this force field analysis is a useful decision-making technique. You know, it really helps you make a decision as to where you want to spend your valuable time and effort, increasing your chances of success. In other words, impact. You will identify ways to really strengthen the forces supporting the full cycle performance and weakening those against it. And more importantly, after you identify the forces for and against, you'll assign a score for each force, 1 being weak and 5 being strong. And then you'll add up those scores. Each column will have those scores, and then you decide where you want to spend your time to increase your chances of full cycle success. So often we spend time on being busy versus looking at the serious impact they have, or focusing on the things that are really not in our control, and then having limited success. So when you take it to the next level, after you identify it and really focus the score and say, okay, this is what we're going to tackle, you then as a team come up with different strategies to strengthen or weaken these forces, and you come up and agree that these are some of the things that you are going to tackle and take on and continually revisit the success of those efforts. So the force field analysis really sets you up for success, because you can have the best product, the best intention, but if you don't have everyone really talking and continually discussing what are you doing to ensure its success, that is when you don't know at the end of the day why you were successful. Now you do. So let's begin with the end in mind. My guess is time came up as a challenge that you wanted to take on, because that is in our direct control more than we realize. So as we look at the full cycle performance timeline, you may be thinking, oh my gosh, it's a big picture. So right now we're actually going to drill it down and give you a smaller snapshot, because we're going to focus in today's segment about from today until October 31st. So within that, you may have experienced, for example, this one, goal setting and calibration, but it might be a goal setting art of one word. It might be how to prepare for a talent conversation in your Courageous Conversation workshop. So there are other things out there to help you through this process. But really, this is phase one. Phase one is now until October 31st. So what is it that we really have to be doing? We're going to be giving you a couple different samples of how other departments are doing it. But for right now, everybody needs to be really focused on institutional goals, individual goals, talent development plans, and then of course at the end, getting all the signatures. So for the 3 to 5 individual goals, I want to remind everyone that, remember, we are making them smarter. They need to be specific. What needs to be accomplished? They need to be measurable. What data needs to be used to define success? It needs to be achievable. Is this challenging but realistic? Relevant? How does it align with the broader goals and needs? Meaning maybe the AVC has some goals, the director has some goals. How is this all fitting into the bigger picture? Is it time bound? What are the deadlines? What are the milestones? You may remember that the goal setting is not just making this smarter goal, but what are the milestones of getting there? And the expectations, E. Is it ethical? Is it enjoyable? Is it energizable? And then, of course, the resources, the R. What assistance will be provided for this? All of these are very, very important as you go through, okay, what do my goals look like? What do my employees' goals look like? What could they look like? How do you develop them? What people sometimes confuse is that goals are really, they say, job duties, and they couldn't be more wrong. Goals are taking on something that is a project or a process improvement idea. It is something that is not necessarily wed on the job duties, because remember, the job duties are all identified and assessed within the institutional goals. You may recall that from the first initial information session. The goals, the individual goals, is your opportunity to say, is there a project I wanted to work on? Is there something that I want to collaborate on with someone else? So it's more project or process or just strategically involved. And we'll go into some of the matrices to some samples as to how they could be. So let's get started with your goals. You know, every real good goal has typically a verb, a noun, a date, and the purpose. What do you want to result as a result of all these efforts? So here's an example. There are actually 3 examples that you could use yourself or tweak to make them work for you. For example, here is a full cycle performance program that is newly launching. Why not have every supervisor have this as their goal? Because to make sure that this is successful, there needs to be conduct 3 two-way talent conversations with all direct reports by October, fill in the date, December, fill in the date, and March, fill in whatever specific date, in order to increase workforce engagement, retention, productivity, and innovation. And again, in order to put the words in that make sense for you. Why are they having these two-way talent conversations? What do you want to increase? Maybe it's simply increasing the relationship and the trust and respect between the supervisor and employee. There's different results depending upon the relationship that they have. Make it fit and make it make sense for your operation. Next, it could be complete talent development opportunities listed in the talent development plan and construct a plan to apply what you learned in order to, again, fill in the blank. And you might be saying, well, that should all just be in the talent development plan. Well, the difference here is how do you apply what you learn? So to construct a plan, and then how to implement it is a whole nother story. And then you discover what milestones go with those in order to ensure application and deliverable. It's that accountability measure. So here's the third option. You could also develop a strategic plan for your department to increase efficiency and communication across departments in order to decrease errors and wait time. Well, within those milestones, it's going to be very important for you to lay out what are some of those points in which you want to ensure your success, and who else is involved in these processes, and what meetings do you have to ensure this success. So that's why these talent conversations are going to be very important, because you can record where you are in that process, because sometimes there are things that are outside your control that you want to make note of, and that increases accountability on other people's parts as well. So that's why we have provided a goal setting worksheet for you as well. The goal setting worksheet is very valuable in constructing them. For example, if you go to the Full Cycle Performance webpage, you will see on the right hand side some important links. You can go to the Full Cycle Performance tools and resources and scroll the whole way down and have all these fillable PDFs so that you can do individual goal setting worksheet or the SHRA individual goals worksheet. You know, you can use some of these tools to really dissect them and make it fit for each individual one. And we'll get into how to make this work for your employees as well. So this isn't just for you, it's for your entire department. So how do we think about these goals? There are actually 9 ways to think about them. So this is where it'd be great if we had a cookie cutter formula for you, but we don't. So when we look at the scope and function of goals, you look at the employee. It could be, the scope could be an employee's job, the entire department, or the entire division. You will see an example as to how that flows out in a little bit. But it could be a critical function of their job. It could be a project. It could be forward focused. You know, you can really customize these to fit what are the needs moving forward. Now, the UNCW strategic plan is also a great way to really map your goals to the bigger picture. What I like about some of these the strategic plan is it's easy for most parties to see themselves in. For example, attract and retain diverse students, faculty, and staff. We can all provide and play a part in providing an inclusive campus culture by our words and our actions. It does not matter whether we are a leader of people or not. We can help all be a part of the culture, the shifting culture, so that we are so global minded and that we are very inclusive in our communication. So even in number 3, being enabling and promoting a sense of place for students. You know, that, and faculty and staff, all of that is something that we can do by fostering collaborative efforts. What are some of the things that we can be doing? And lastly, organizing for effective engagement with our community and the world, and communicating efforts broadly and effectively. You know, so how do you communicate what it is that you're doing? How do you partner with the community? Everyone actually is encouraged to partner with our community with a minimum of 24 hours a year. How many of your staff actually do that? We recently experienced much success taking departments on retreats that go out and they do community engagement, and they are communicating in ways the teams have never communicated before. They're actually getting to know one another and really building rapport. And that's the stuff that doesn't always happen because we're so busy being busy and doing our work. So these are some of the things that, you know, if you dig deep enough, you're going to be able to see that you can be a part of this and really be strategic. You know, for example, recently I actually facilitated a mini retreat that anyone could really facilitate, but it was for student accounts and cashiers. And we talked about, okay, what are Sarah Thorndike's goals for all her area? Then what is the director of student accounts and cashiers priorities for that area. And you can see here, what is it? Attract and retain, fund and build. What does that look like? And then look at it from the strategic plan. Where can you find some goals that resonate with your position? I'll give you another example that, for example, in our office, the HR staff directors, the directors all came together and did a SWOT analysis. SWOT, strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Again, mindtools.com has an amazing SWOT document that you can really walk through your teams. Another great traditional staff meeting topic. Do the force field analysis on one, do a SWOT on another. You see how you're actually developing your team simply by discussing and using some of these tools. You don't have to be an expert trainer. You just have to be a communicator and a listener and a facilitator towards common goals. So after our director had a SWOT analysis done with the directors, they came up with 5 main priorities: employee work-life balance, identify meaningful metrics, leverage technology, diversity and inclusion plan, data integrity, and reporting standards. So this is some of the things that are all tied into what the director needs, the AVC needs, and so we're all aligning ourselves. In addition, we have HR values. Does your department have values? Ours are engage, perform, develop, retain. So what are we doing that is aligned and misaligned? So what are our goals that we want moving forward? Again, remember, this year you only have to have 3 individual goals. So again, what are you going to do? How do you get started? As an example, my supervisor, Liz, gave us an email, and you can see how she laid it out for us. And she basically said, schedule a time for the both of us to meet in September for at least an hour. Use the goal setting job aid attached, and again, you can find that at Full Cycle Performance Guide. You can bring it all right up there, and it's online, or at the below description. You have that connection as well. So after you schedule the time, you use the goal setting job aid to start drafting it. Again, a draft is a draft. It's not final. So, and then also draft the talent development plan. Where do you want to learn and grow, and where do you think you need to learn and grow? And again, bring it to the meeting. Anything is possible at this moment. Everything's on the table. So when we come together, we're also going to look at, okay, look at the strategic plan, look at the values, look at the priorities. What are some goals? Come up with 3 goals, possible goals that you want to take on. And again, she concludes it with, let me know if you have any questions, and a warm close. So the intent is pretty clear. So as you go on and say, okay, now how do I do this though? It's already, say it's beginning of September, and you have till the end of October to do page 1 through 6, calibrate, set the goals, align everything. What are the milestones? What does exceeding expectations look like? These are the things that if you wait till mid-October to do it, you are going to be scrambling, and you're not going to do justice to your employee or yourself. So this is really your opportunity to be strategic and develop yourself and develop your people. So this is how it's working in our office. So here's a sample timeline. And remember, the due date is October 31st. So in the beginning of September, the directors and supervisors meet to establish unit goals that are aligned with the strategic plan and divisional goals. Now again, that already happened in our office, but now, as we move forward for all of you, that is your starting point. Where is it that we want to go? And then next, in a staff meeting, the supervisor shares some overarching priorities and her or his individual goals and talent development plan. Model the way by sharing your own, because that may be the thing that inspires and links everyone else's goals into what you're doing. Again, we need to break down silos, and we need to see how we can collaborate and at least just empathize and understand where other people's priorities are. This will reduce potential conflict in the future as well and hold people accountable. Why not? That's what the Chancellor encourages us to ask ourselves. So what's great is, by 9/16, for example, September 16th, the supervisor gives employees 7 days to complete 2 fillable forms. And again, it's found on our website, Individual Goals and Talent Development Plan. You'll see the next milestone is by 9/23, employees submit the self-assessment, their draft goals, and the talent development plan to their supervisor. Then all the supervisors in a unit come back to discuss their employees' goals, milestones, and exceeding expectations with the director. That could be a calibration goal setting session as well, looking at similar positions to make sure there is equity in the process. So what is great after that is by October 14th, the supervisor then goes back and meets with employees to discuss and finalize the goals, the milestones, exceeding expectations. Because remember, it's all a draft up until this point. And now that everything is calibrated and looked across the organization, the staff meeting, you can have a staff meeting on 10/21 and really get excited about, okay, what are we working on here? And everybody shares their goals openly. There is no hidden factory, as Six Sigma would call it. Everything is a visual factory. It's open. And strategies are shared that are needed to ensure everyone's success. Now, I recommend also having another team meeting scheduled for December and February to focus on the progress made towards the goals, and also, especially as you get closer to the end of the cycle, to make sure you're all rating in an equitable fashion. Since you set up exceeding expectations in the beginning, there should not be a lot of confusion as to what that rating looks like. If you don't set it up in the beginning, then it's going to be difficult. So it's important that at the end, and I have here 10/28, that the director double checks that the performance plans are completed, signed, and dated with all the finalized goals, milestones, and expectations, specifically exceeding expectations. This is where energy and excitement can take place because of what can happen in the future.
Now, let's shift our focus a little bit to the calibration process. So to begin with, when we talk about calibration, all we're really talking about is a discussion between a set of supervisors to set fair and consistent expectations and ratings within their area. So to calibrate means basically that you all are on the same page, both at the beginning and end of each cycle. It's important to note that the calibration process is only required for similar positions within your department or within your office. So for example, let's say you have 2 admin support associates who work in your office and have pretty similar job duties and daily responsibilities. A calibration session would be important to them to make sure that they're being held to the same standards and have their work rated accordingly. However, even though calibration is not required for positions that aren't similar, it is a best practice to discuss the performance expectations across different types of positions within your area, especially for employees who work together frequently. You might also find that some institutional goals, take team-oriented, for example, do apply to all employees regardless of their job title. So in that case, you'd want to calibrate so that you can discuss the consistency for those expectations. So why spend time calibrating with supervisors in your area? Fortunately, there is a lot of value to having these calibration discussions. What they do is, firstly, they enable a more fair and consistent evaluation process within your unit. Ultimately, this will eliminate the issue of one supervisor in your area maybe being known as the easy rater, while another might be considered the tough rater because you don't have the same expectations up at the beginning. So ultimately what it's doing is it's making this a more transparent process for your employees and for your fellow managers. What the calibration process doesn't do is focus on meeting a quota or a forced distribution. This is a common myth that has been passed around campus in the past, but there is no forced distribution that says, for example, if you have 10 employees, only 2 can get an exceeding expectations at the end of the cycle. If all of your employees are exceeding expectations, then they should be rated as such. Having the calibration discussions up front with your peer supervisors will help to alleviate any of that miscommunication throughout the process. So essentially, it won't allow the expectations or rating across your units to be unclear or inconsistent. So now let's go over what will make a successful calibration discussion. The first step is to determine who the calibration facilitator will be. Usually the manager of the supervisory team will be the facilitator of the conversation, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. Either way, it's important that the facilitator knows who he or she is up front. If you become the facilitator for your group's calibration session, then you'll have basically 4 main responsibilities. The first is to set the rules, so review the process in advance that the team should follow and hold each member of your team accountable to those rules. This will make for a smooth process. Second, you'll definitely want to keep the discussion focused. It's really easy to get sidetracked on specific or unique situations that have occurred or maybe could occur in the future, and this can easily derail the conversation into unnecessary details or on issues that aren't relevant to everyone in the meeting or the meeting's purpose. So as the facilitator, it's your responsibility to table some conversations for another time or have one-on-one meetings to address some of those specific concerns, but make sure that that conversation does stay focused so that it is most efficient for everybody. It's also important for you as a facilitator to ensure input. You might notice that maybe there are some outspoken supervisors in your team, and they may dominate the conversation or sort of impose their way of doing things. So it's your job to make sure that all voices, so all managers in your team, are heard in the conversation so that it can be, again, as fair as possible. And finally, as facilitator, it is important that you facilitate more than you decide. Of course, you may provide input, you're a part of the team, but you should be selective when doing so during the discussion. Your most important role is to get the ideas on the table and then serve as decision maker once the conversation is over. We've also got some general ground rules for everyone participating in a calibration discussion. Firstly, it's important to approach the calibration conversation as a management team. Basically, this is not a competition to see who has the best employees or worst employees or who the best supervisor is. The goal is to get on the same page about how you describe strong performers and weak performers so that you can be consistent as a supervisory team. Employees will notice if you are each setting different standards, which will weaken your success as a team. It's also going to be important not to expect perfection. You're not going to be able to address every possible variation, and not everyone will agree on every single thing. The team should strive for consensus on what's important and what's necessary, and you may not get absolute agreement all the time, but it is important to get consistent alignment. You'll also want the group to focus on fairness, not necessarily happiness. Giving an undeserved high rating may make that employee happy, for example, but it won't make the other 3 employees happy who often have to do that person's work. The better path towards happy and productive employees is through being fair. Additionally, this one may seem obvious, but it is important during these meetings to think before speaking. More importantly, listen actively so you can understand the perspectives of your colleagues. It's also essential to keep the discussion current. Limit it only to the needs of the current cycle and to the employee performance during this cycle. This is not the time to keep going over things that employees have done in previous years or how we used to do things. Think about what the business needs are this year. What did the employee achieve this year? You'll also want to both give and be able to receive healthy pushback. During these calibration meetings, it's okay to challenge your colleagues about their expectation levels and their interpretations of performance. Your colleagues can also add some objectivity to your own decision making. It may help you see things that you couldn't see yourself. Keep an open mind. In a similar vein, use this conversation to be open and honest with one another. If you think an expectation is too high or too low, for example, or maybe there are priorities that aren't being addressed, then say something. It's also going to be important to maintain confidentiality. There might be information shared about specific employees within your unit that they wouldn't want shared outside of this meeting, so make sure that all participants know to maintain confidentiality of this information. Basically, what's said in the room stays in the room about things that are sensitive. And finally, to make the most of this calibration process, remember, this is more than a ratings exercise. If you fully apply calibration, it'll provide greater focus and clarity on strategic business needs for your office. It'll also provide insight for attending to things like talent management, career development, and succession planning. Because the objective of performance planning is to make the university a more efficient and effective organization, you should really pursue calibration as more than a simple compliance exercise. Pursue it as an opportunity to strengthen your organization to better serve the university. So once you've set the date for your calibration meeting, how do you actually structure it so that it's successful? Basically, there are 4 elements to make these meetings successful. First, preparation. It's going to be important that the supervisors who are attending this calibration session know what it is in advance so that they can do the necessary pre-work. You'll find this meeting goes a lot smoother if everyone brings something to the table and is ready to go. Next, these meetings should always have an introduction. This is where the facilitator comes in to set the ground rules and outline the objectives of the meeting. Then, it's time for the meat of the calibration session, the discussion and definition. This is where you and your peer supervisors will talk about things like determining what similar positions are, discussing institutional goals, talking about additional resources and individual goals, even talking about the weights for the goals, and then of course talking about talent development. Once you've gone over all that, do a quick review, make sure there's consensus, and the meeting's over. The great thing about these calibration sessions is that there's a good chance you and your fellow supervisors have already been having them. For example, if you meet regularly to discuss things like setting up work projects or plans, or assigning tasks for the upcoming year, maybe setting office priorities or strategic plans, these are all examples of calibration. Again, making sure that you're all on the same page. So the process that we've already outlined is something you can easily add to these meetings that you might already have. So to give an example of what a calibration conversation might look like, let's take a close look at one of the SHRA institutional goals and figure out what a calibration discussion about this goal might include. So the goal that I'd like to look at is the first goal, expertise, and specifically we're going to focus on the development section of expertise. So to calibrate within our area, we want to make sure that our employees are held to the same standards for this development. So this means that meeting expectations in development, exceeding expectations in development, and not meeting expectations in this area are going to be similar for all these employees. Again, it's going to make it a more fair process. So in this meeting, we're going to start defining in a little bit more detail what these different expectations look like. So let's start with meeting expectations. As you know, what's written in the form is the definition of meeting expectations for each of these goals, but maybe we want to expand it a little bit more than what's written. So for development, let's say meeting expectations is going to be that the employee maintains technical skills and relevant professional credentials. Maybe they also maintain connections with professionals in their field. Finally, let's say that they seek ways to address development needs instead of assigning blame when things go wrong. So this is going to be our general standard for our office for development in the goal of expertise. So now we want to start thinking about how will these employees go above and beyond to earn that exceeding expectations rating. This can be tricky, especially depending on what institutional goal you're looking at. So to help with this, we've come up with a couple guidelines to help you and your peer supervisors differentiate between meeting expectations and exceeding expectations. One area that you might look at when trying to tell the difference between the ratings is whether your employee is reactive or proactive. So, for example, you'll ask, is this employee doing the job when required or when asked, which would be meeting expectations? Or is this employee anticipating potential setbacks, projects, or actions in advance to be ready when the time comes? This might be considered exceeding expectations. Similarly, you want to consider frequency and consistency. So ask yourselves and your peer supervisors, how consistent is this employee in completing the job roles? How frequently does this employee go above and beyond the basic requirements? And finally, look at an employee's attitude and ability to share. So you might ask yourself, does this employee maintain a positive or encouraging attitude when completing his or her work? Is the employee a champion of the institutional goals and a model for others in the department? These are other examples of what might take an employee to that exceeding expectations level. Ultimately, this is up to you and your peer supervisors to set these expectations and make them clear. So let's go back to that development portion of the expertise goal. Exceeding expectations in this area might be an employee that continually enhances technical skills and professional credentials, which could include going above the basic requirements. This employee might also be recognized as an expert in their field, and maybe they participate in professional associations to ensure visibility in that field. Similarly, this employee might seek out and engage in continuous learning and growth opportunities, and on top of that, provides coaching to others to leverage their strengths and develop their areas of needed improvement. So again, having that positive attitude, being the role model for this goal. This is what's going to take this employee to that exceeding expectations level. Finally, let's take a look at what not meeting expectations might be in this development area. I think you'll find that talking about not meeting expectations is going to be a little bit easier than talking about meeting versus exceeding, but it's still going to be an important part of the conversation. So in this case, not meeting expectations for development might be an employee who doesn't show any initiative or just a little initiative to maintain those technical skills or relevant credentials, and this employee doesn't maintain connections with other professionals in their field. This employee only takes advantage of learning when it's required and often focuses on assigning blame on others when things go wrong, rather than trying to work towards their own growth and development to solve a problem. So hopefully by now you can see the importance of having these calibration conversations with fellow leadership in your area, and the importance of defining not only what meeting expectations looks like for goals, but also exceeding expectations. You may have noticed that the full cycle appraisal tool doesn't actually include a place to document meeting, exceeding, not meeting expectations for the institutional goals. It's expected that you'll talk about these with your peer supervisors and then with your employees. However, if you are interested in documenting them, especially during this transition period, we've made a fillable PDF where you can write out what each institutional goal will look like in regards to meeting, exceeding, and not meeting expectations. You can download it here. Furthermore, if you're still having trouble defining each institutional goal, especially in that exceeding or not meeting expectations area, we've also developed, with the help of GA, a suggested institutional goal guideline set that defines and breaks down each goal in a little bit more detail to help you out. One more important topic to discuss during a calibration meeting is the weighting of institutional goals for SHRA employees. For these employees, the institutional goals must total 50% of the final overall rating. So for non-supervisory employees, that normally would be 10% for each of the 5 institutional goals. But for some jobs, certain institutional goals may be more important than others, so supervisors can determine how great a percentage that apply to each goal. It's important to remember that each goal must be a minimum of 5%. So during calibration, supervisors should discuss if there is a business need to change the weight of any goals for particular positions or even groups of positions. For example, there may be a position that is heavy on customer contact, so maybe customer-oriented has a 15% or a 20% weight of the overall rating. This would mean that you'd have to reduce the weights of other institutional goals so that the total weight for institutional goals remains at 50%. Here are a couple other examples of ways that weights could shift based on the type of work an employee does. For example, there might be a position requiring high attention to detail and strict rule enforcement, where you'd put more emphasis on things like expertise and compliance and integrity. Or maybe you have a position that requires heavy coordination within teams to complete projects, and there you might put a little bit more emphasis on accountability and team-oriented. Finally, one last topic to discuss during calibration, but also to reflect on your own time as a supervisor, is reviewer bias. Because before assigning ratings to any of your employees' performance, it's important to step back and consider the potential effects. I want to go over some of the most common forms of reviewer or rater bias, the first two being halo bias and horns bias, which are opposites of one another, where the halo bias is the tendency to give favorable ratings due to strong performance in just one or two areas, while the horns bias is tendency to give unfavorable ratings due to poor performance in just one or two areas. Another two common ones are both the primacy and the recency biases. The primacy bias is when you establish a positive or negative opinion of someone early in their review period and allow that to influence all later perceptions of performance. Whereas the recency bias allows the employee's most recent performance level to skew your opinion of the total work for the cycle. You'll see from our list that there are numerous other types of rater biases. We want you to make sure that you're aware of all of these, especially before going into your talent conversations. We'll provide a link to the full list of these biases and their descriptions down below. On behalf of the Full Cycle Performance team and UNCW Human Resources, I want to thank you for completing this virtual workshop on goal setting and calibration. To help you along your path to success, we have 5 next steps for you to take as a result of this workshop. First, make sure that all your leaders and direct reports have attended the appropriate full cycle workshop, whether the supervisory or the employee one. We'll be offering these virtually and we'll have the links below. Second, Be sure to review all available full cycle performance workshops and resources. There's a lot out there to help you make the most of this program. Third, discuss whether or not you need to have a calibration session, and if you do, plan it accordingly with your fellow supervisors. Fourth, share a minimum of 3 positive things about this new tool and process with your employees. Keep the word positive. And finally, develop your own timeline so that you can increase buy-in and maximize the time and effectiveness of this full cycle performance program. Thank you.